Therefore, it's a great pleasure to welcome the MD of Building Information Ireland, Danny O'Shea, to give the very latest picture. Danny.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and Minister, even though you're gone. As Ivan said, my name is Danny O'Shea. I'm the Managing Director of Building Information Ireland, and I'm delighted to be given this opportunity here this morning to give you some insights and to share some insights on the current state of the construction industry. I'm always struck by the fact that the construction industry has a unique position, or should I say those who sell products or materials into the construction industry have a distinct advantage in that they know who their customers are, and therefore they know the market. They know this because in order to build anything, you must engage in the various planning, tendering, and regulatory processes. So since 2014, Building Information Ireland have been gathering data from all these processes. Pretty much every planning application, tender, commencement would have been collected, valued, analysed. And by pulling all this primary data together, factoring in market intelligence and government policy, current trends become apparent and forecasts can be made. This morning, we look at the overall industry and then we focus on residential, because residential is the largest sector and the issues that surround it affect the economy as a whole, and then we'll draw some observations. The graphs and numbers that you will see that I'll present here are extracted from the latest Building Construction Index. Our numbers run up to the end of June 2022, and the index has just been published, and there are copies on the tables or on the available at the back of the hall, and everybody are welcome to take them. So I guess what this is doing is kind of putting a bit of flesh on some of the things that were alluded to by Frank and the Minister, some of the specifics. So if we start with our first set of numbers, which just indicate the scale of the construction sector today. So in the first half of 2022, 20.5 billion euro of potential construction activity has gone for planning. So just a brief explainer, when we're looking at values here, we're talking about construction value, nothing to do with the cost of acquiring land or financing. This is straight construction value. In that same period, we see that 11.6 billion euro was granted, and that 5.7 billion euro actually went to site, actually started. So if we compare this to the two previous years, we can see that applications have increased by 50%. Projects granted remain fairly static, and commencements remain fairly static. The reason for the dramatic increase, I'll see my laser thing work here, for the dramatic increase is that this period contained the deadline for the submission of SHDs, the Strategic Housing Developments, which were being phased out and are being replaced by LRDs. Okay, so that's the actual scale at the moment. Just to give a little bit of geographical context to these numbers, we can see that overall 50% of all activity is in the area controlled by the 4 Dublin local authorities, with Leinster having 20%, Munster 20%, and Connacht Ulster the remaining 7%. So to get a better view, let's just have a look at the trends. So let's go back to 2019 and bring it forward from there. So what we see is continuing growth in applications. Applications in many ways represent the sentiment in the industry, and indeed is a good indicator of sentiment in the wider economy. In this instance, the sentiment could be seen as being positive. If we break out this subset of applications that refer to residential projects, we can see that residential at the moment accounts for 79% of the applications, and the other making up the remaining 21%. So the other is obviously commercial, industrial activity, hospitals, schools. You'll see from our indices, we break the sector we break the industry into 8 sectors, but for today's purposes, we'll just break it into 2. So if we look at the trends and track them through, we can see that the trends are by and large upwards. Now, if we look at commencement trends for that same 3-year period, we'll see that in total they're coming downward. And if we break out the residential, we'll also see that they are in decline also. So residential, in this case, make up 68% of total commencements, while the others are fairly static, maybe slightly downwards. And again, to follow that trend, we're going somewhat down. I know that there is a COVID blip in the middle there, but there is also pent-up demand post-COVID that should have lifted it a little bit further. So now that we've established that housing makes up the lion's share of the industry and dictates the trends, let's take a closer look at the residential sector. So here we have the unit count of all residential. So this would include one-off houses, smaller developments, as well as SHDs. What we can see is an accelerating increase, notwithstanding COVID, so on and so forth. Grants have remained fairly steady, and commencements have declined slightly. And with the trend, we can see that the trends are diverging, the lines are diverging there. If we go a little bit more granular and we extract the SHD data only, because this is where the big unit numbers are, the deviations become more pronounced. The deltas here, between here and here, is what should concern us. Now, obviously, there is a glut in the first half of people getting to the deadline and getting SHD applications in, but the fact that the trends are diverging is a matter of concern. So if we go down a little bit closer again and look at the actual project count of SHDs. Now, bear in mind, SHDs were introduced in 2016 as a mechanism to try and fast track much needed large housing developments. Indeed, SHDs could be further divided into two camps, basically your build to rent apartments, which are typically in Dublin, and then your more traditional developments for build to sell in urban areas. And anecdotally, it appears that both sets of those have their own sets of issues that has perhaps prevented them from getting off the ground or being smoothly run through. So if we look at the actual unit count, we're not talking about project count, we're not talking about massive numbers. We're talking about perhaps a couple of hundred of these all told. So at a project level, the trend is the same as the count level. So whilst every individual project has its own hurdles to overcome, when you put all of these together, this doesn't paint a very inspiring picture. These two deltas here shouldn't be like that. They should be closer together. So, what observations can we make at this point? We can see that there has been a large increase in residential applications, but that has not been matched by a similar increase in projects being granted, and that commencements remain static despite the increase in demand. An interesting little statistic here that a strategic housing development that started in 2019 typically took 36 weeks from lead time from application to commencement. So what we did here is we looked at any ones that commenced in that year, and then we went back and we saw when did those guys lodge their application. So the average when this more or less when this was introduced was 36 weeks. If we look at a similar project in 2020, it took 97 weeks on average, more than doubled. And remember, we are only measuring the ones that have actually started. We would reckon from crunching the numbers that there's in excess of 150,000 residential units at granted stage that have not commenced. So these are valid planning applications that have been granted, are out there, and haven't gone to site. Now, at one stage, just a caveat, we must say that 30% of all decisions at one stage were subject to judicial review, which added further delays, and some of those have washed through, but the lead times are expanding and expanding. So if we just step away from those numbers for a moment, it's worth looking at some of the wider opportunities and issues that are coming down the line for the industry. Government policy, which was alluded to already by the Minister and Frank, we have Project Ireland 2040. The government is to spend 165 billion euros between now and 2040. There will be some overlap with housing there, but a lot of this is infrastructure, the likes of Metro West and additional motorway systems, so on and so forth. So this will obviously bring a strain on the already stretched construction sector. The government retrofit scheme, there are plans to upgrade 75,000 homes per year. And again, the Minister mentioned that earlier on the number of people that are going to be needed to do that. And the Housing for All scheme, which is absolutely laudable yet very ambitious targets to achieve. Other issues which Frank alluded to, the cost of materials inflation driven by the COVID hangover and the dreadful Russian invasion of Ukraine. And other things to bear in mind along the line would be the continued difficulty in securing connections to utilities. The access to finance is going to change as interest rates begin to rise. And then the micro redress scheme, very, very topical at the moment, with the concrete levy being a burning issue. So bearing those things in mind, if we go back to the graph we looked at earlier of all housing, and we need to focus on housing because it's vital to the continued economic health of the country. So of the two deltas that we're looking at, sorry, let's go back there, this one or this one. The first one, which is representative of the bottlenecks and flaws in the current planning, is in some ways being addressed through the introduction of the LRD system and proposed reforms of onboard Panola, etc. So let's watch this space and see does that regularize itself. The second one is perhaps what we must grapple with as the industry. As we said earlier, applications represent the sentiment, and in this case, positive sentiment. So why is this not being reflected in actual activity? It would appear that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. However, using that analogy, the problem, it isn't entirely true. Which of the many players is the weak flesh that's involved? So we just take a more in-depth look at that little area I was looking at there, the commencements over the last 12 months, which is post-COVID, and one would have thought that there would be a pent-up demand. We can see that the downward spiral continues, or the downward trend continues. So as I said before, projects make up these stats. They all have unique issues. Perhaps the wrong planning was granted in the first instance and they're no longer viable, so therefore they need to be recycled. Perhaps they're waiting for infrastructure or utilities before they can start. Or maybe it's a skills and material shortage. Whatever it is, solutions must be found, and there would appear to be political goodwill to assist in that. The economy in general has a fair wind behind it. Foreign direct investment continues apace. We have almost full employment. We have positive immigration. For the first time since the Great Hunger, the population is over 5 million. But all of this growth may be compromised unless we can successfully address this issue. So hopefully a forum like today's conference may go some way to finding the necessary answers. Thank you very much.